Hi folks, today we're going to be learning how to build a custom built PC, but in PC Building Simulator. Now, I know it's not exactly like doing it in person, and at some point I will make a video for you guys on how to build a custom PC, but for this video we're going to be doing it in this game. So let's hop right in. So let's choose a case. It doesn't really matter which case we choose, but actually for this video I'll show you folks a, I guess, rather budget gaming PC build. You know, it's something that'll get the job done, it's actually a pretty solid, good gaming PC, but, you know, won't break the bank. So we will stick to that build guide. Now, first of all, you're going to want to remove the case. Remove the side panels from the case to make sure that we can work in it. And you're going to want to put that down on your desk. Next up, you're going to have to get your motherboard ready. Now, in this game, it does ask you to put the motherboard directly into the PC. Personally, I don't like to do that at the start. I usually put it on the motherboard box so I can work with it outside of the case, because when it's in the case it kind of gets, you know, things can get in your way. It might be tricky, so I typically just stay on the box and put the motherboard in later. But for the sake of following the mechanics of this game, we're going to put it directly in. Now what we are going to be putting in is, we'll be throwing this one in. Oops. There we go. So we're going to throw this motherboard in. It's a ATX motherboard on a mid-sized tower case. And that's the one you're going to want. And of course, if you have a smaller, like a micro ATX case, you're going to want a micro ATX motherboard. So let's remove the screws so that we can put the motherboard into its spot and of course screw it back in. But like I said, you will typically want to wait until after you put a few things in before you put the motherboard in. Great, so now that we got that in, we are going to be picking a CPU. For the sake of this one, I am going to use a Ryzen 5600X. On an AMD build, the pins are actually on the CPU, not on the motherboard. For this one, you just lift this lever over here, pop the CPU in, and it will have an arrow on the CPU as well as on the board. As long as you line those two up, you're putting it in properly. So you just pop those in, lower the lever, and it will lock the CPU in place. Now, on an Intel motherboard, it works a bit differently. So we have this Intel motherboard right here. If we have a CPU, we are going to... Oops, this is already open. It should not already be open. So this lever right... I know it doesn't show it properly in the video, but this lever right here, you're going to want to pull it out to the right and then let it pop up. This should come with it. I know it doesn't show it in this picture or in this game, but there's usually a case or a cover on top of this shield as well. So let's find a CPU that fits with this. Sure, we'll go with that one. Now, CPUs that are Intel, you have to be a bit more careful, at least in my experience, a bit more careful, because the pins are actually on the motherboard, not on the CPU. It might not pop in as nicely as a AMD CPU. So if you put this in wrong or you don't line it up properly, it could bend one of the pins on the motherboard or more. You'll have to go out and buy a whole new motherboard, so do be careful of that. So you just want to pop the motherboard in, or the CPU, sorry, in. When you close this, if you have the little cover on top of the shield just should pop right out. You put the lever back in place. Now back over to the build that we are doing right now. The next thing you want to do is to put the RAM sticks in. I suppose it doesn't really matter which ones we choose, but just for fun, we will choose some RGB Let's go with... There we go. We will do these ones right here. Now your motherboard should have labels on it as to where to put in sticks if you're only doing 2. Now if you're doing all 4, it doesn't matter. Just throw in all 4 to all 4 different slots. But if you're doing 2, it does actually make a difference, and there is an optimal way to put them in. Now refer to your motherboard manual if it doesn't label it properly onto your motherboard. Now they're usually 1 space apart because it doesn't... I don't know if this game actually has it written in it to care if I do it properly or not. And I also don't see labeling on this motherboard, so I'm just going to throw them into these slots. And let's grab another one of those ones. Perfect. There's only one way that you can put the RAM in. If you put it in correctly, the levers, or the clips, sorry, on the side should pop right back up once it's in. Now, if you're doing an M.2 SSD, you're going to want to put it in before you put the CPU cooler on. If you're not doing it, then you can just skip that. But usually, if your motherboard has more than one M.2 slot, you want to use the one that's closer to your CPU. Or, in my experience at least, it does make a difference. If you're not doing an M.2, which I am not for the sake of this video, we can skip that part and go straight to the CPU cooler. Now, the CPU that I chose, the 5600X, actually does come with a stock fan. You can use that stock fan if you so desire. Let's see how this one is. I think this one looks nice. We can put it in like that, and it should be good. Now, sometimes fans like this can get in the way if you have a memory stick in this front slot, and if that is the case, you're just gonna have to turn it the other way to hope that it fits. And as a matter of fact, I just missed a crucial part. Now, on most stock CPUs, it does come with thermal paste pre-applied, but it may not, and you have to make sure that you do check your CPU cooler to make sure it has thermal paste pre-applied. If not, you want to use thermal paste, do a little pea-sized dot right in the middle, and then you're good to apply your CPU cooler. If you were using the stock fan that comes with a Ryzen 5600X, it will come with thermal paste pre-applied. If not, make sure that you do apply it, and you can pop that right in. Just screw each of the 4 down. It's best to screw it in diagonally. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is install the case fans. Now this one actually does come with 2. Comes with 1 exhaust back here and 1 intake over there. So we're actually going to remove this front panel so that we can remove this one, because I want to have an RGB fan on the front. So let's go throw one of those in. So I suppose it doesn't matter which one we choose. Let's go with this one. Yeah, let's do this one right here. So we're actually going to throw one of these in. Also have one up there as well. So let me grab another one of those that I just put in. I believe it was it this one? No. Yeah, it was that one. Perfect. So in terms of fan configuration, this PC does work. You're going to want to remember that the face will suck the air through. So if you see a face, the air will be going from the right to the left, which is from the outside in, and that is the way that we want it. You typically want to have either even number of exhaust and intake, or more intake than exhaust. You don't want to have more exhaust than intake. So this configuration does work. Now, it depends on which case you have. You could also have your exhaust on the top. This case doesn't allow for that. And you could also have intake fans on the bottom. Also, it doesn't seem like this case allows for that. The next thing we're going to want to do is put in a power supply unit. So we're going to remove this PSU mount down here. Find a power supply that will work. And you're going to want to make sure that the capacity of the power supply is fairly higher than the recommended amount for all the parts that you pick, especially if you're planning on doing overclocking. So I suppose it doesn't really matter. We can do this one right here. We'll go with this one. We'll plug this one in. Or sorry, screw this one in. So this one is modular. There are non-modular ones where it just has everything plugged in and the wires are already all there, and you're just going to have to grab each wire and plug it into its applicable spot. But this one's modular, so we can have a better time with cable management by having less wires, or I guess the wires that we don't need to have not even there in the first place. But before we get to plugging in things from the PSU to the motherboard and everything else, we're going to actually put in a storage. As I mentioned, we're not going to be using a M.2, we're just going to be using a normal SSD. So let's go with that. Find one that we like. That's a bit overkill, but we'll go for it anyways. Now, there are sometimes cases, or actually most of the time cases, that have a spot on the case to screw in your SSD. If it doesn't have that, you are going to have to put it into one of the hard disk drive bays. That's okay, you just screw it into one of these. But this one does actually have a spot on the case for our SSD, so we're going to put it there. You could also just plug in your SSD and have it dangling, I guess. But I certainly don't recommend that, although it is an option, I suppose. You can't do that with a hard disk drive. So we're going to actually put this in. I guess we don't need to screw it in. So the next thing we're going to do is cables. So we're going to be plugging in the CPU cooler to the motherboard, where it says to plug in the CPU cooler. Now, I don't think there's labeling in this. This kind of shows me where to put things. Most motherboards are fairly similar as to where things do go, like case fans. There's going to be a spot right around here. And this one we can plug in here. It will say CPU_fan, I believe, on most motherboards for that one. Let's plug in the last fan. Now next up is the 24-pin ATX. That one's hard to miss. It's really big. Now we can plug this one in. We're going to plug the case into the motherboard. And all cases are different. Some will have more plugs than others. Some may have RGB switches if you have an RGB case. Of course, we put in our own custom fans. That one actually can be more complicated, so make sure you refer to your motherboard manual or read the labeling on it. Usually there is labeling on some motherboards. I'm trying to think. I know Asus ones have motherboards where it does have labeling as to where you plug each case slot into. Some may not, so refer to the manual for sure. Now we're going to plug in the SSD. This one goes into the power supply to give it power, and the other SATA one we're actually going to plug in here, as long as you have both plugs into the SSD. That should be good to go. And now the last step to setting up the PC, or at least building the PC, is to plug in install a graphics card. Now, you don't actually need to install a graphics card on some computers. Most business computers don't actually have a graphics card. It's not necessary. They have a integrated graphics card in the CPU. We put in a 5600X, which actually does not have integrated graphics. But for AMD, if you see the G at the end of a number, it does have integrated graphics. And for Intel, I believe all of them have integrated graphics except for the ones that end in F, but I could be mistaken about that. So we're going to be throwing it in a graphics card. I did say a budget PC, so we're going to be putting in something. Sure. Actually, I changed my mind. We're going to be plugging in. Let's just for the hell of it, let's just match the. Oh, we do need to actually remove the PCIe slots. So okay, so that one and that one. So we're gonna remove the PCI slots. Plug in a GPU, And just for the sake of matching the motherboard, it's not actually necessary, but we're going to put in a MSI third-party graphics card and throw that one in. Now the PC build is almost done. All we need to do at this point is get a... Oops, there it is. Get a USB drive with Windows or whatever OS that you were using on it. And you're going to have to use another computer to do that. Unless you're classic and have a disk, but we don't even have a disk drive in this PC. So we're going to plug in the USB drive. All you have to do from here is boot the computer. Oh, that's not true actually. I forgot to plug in the graphics card. You're certainly going to have to do that, or else you won't get too far. So plug in the PCIe cables from the PSU to the graphics card. We will put the keyboard and mouse into the motherboard, the HDMI into the graphics card. You're going to want to make sure you use HDMI at first until you have drivers. It may not recognize a DisplayPort. Now we're good to boot it up. And there it is. It's installing the operating system that this game has. Now, of course, Windows has to make everything far more complicated than that. Your OS won't be installed that quickly. But it is actually really that simple. This is a, like I mentioned, a budget PC build. I actually forgot to put the PSU mount back in. There we go. It's a budget PC build. Certainly doesn't break the bank. These prices aren't actually that accurate anymore. Or at least they're a bit out of date. These are actually going for about $250 Canadian now, and these are going for, I believe, somewhere around 800 bucks, maybe even 7. So actually might be mistaken about that, but nonetheless, there's your budget PC build. I hope this helped. I know it's not with an in-person PC with in-person computer components. It is in a game. But hopefully I helped show you around the game and helped you get an idea of at least how to build your first ever, or maybe even second or third PC. Take care, folks, and I'll see you on the next video.